on the subject of data in a post-COVID world. My name is Catherine Webb and I'm Executive Secretary of the AHUA, and I'm delighted to introduce this webinar organised in partnership with Andy Youell and Leigh. It's great to have so many of you with us this afternoon. I think we're up to about 50 people so far, so that's really good news. So before I introduce our speakers, I've got just a couple of quick items of housekeeping. Firstly, we will be recording the webinar, so you can revisit it after today, should you wish to. Secondly, you'll see on your screen a Q&A facility, so do please feel free to ask questions at any time during the webinar, and Andy and Alex will answer them towards the end. You can also vote questions up with the little thumbs up icon. My colleague, Robin Henderson, who is the AHUA's development consultant, who's also on your screen, well, his picture's on your screen, he'll be giving us a hand with the questions here. And thirdly, we'll be launching a number of polls during the course of the presentation, so do please vote in those, and we'll be showing the results in real time on the screen. So, without further ado, that's enough from me. It's my great pleasure now to introduce our two speakers for this afternoon, Andy Youell and Leigh. Andy is a writer, speaker, and strategic data advisor. He was formerly the Director of Data Policy and Governance at HISA, and he's been working with data issues across HE over 3 decades. His work has covered all aspects of the data and systems lifecycle, and in recent years has focused on improving the HE sector's relationship with data. Leigh has been passionate about putting data to work for over 20 years. He's worked with over 50 UK universities and most of the major sector bodies, including HISA and UCAS. Alex has developed a number of successful data management and data governance frameworks, which put culture at the heart of managing data as an asset. So it's my great pleasure to say many thanks to Andy and Alex, and over to you to start the presentation.
Thank you very much, Catherine, and hopefully I've remembered to unmute my mic so that everyone can hear me this afternoon. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to be a part of this event with Alex and with AHUA. So we are going to think about the current upheaval in the world that's been brought on by this COVID-19 event, and because we are a sector that is increasingly measured and assessed and regulated and judged through the medium of data, what Alex and I want to do this afternoon is really think about the issues around this upheaval through the lens of data. So we want to think about where we are with data, some of the key issues, some of the challenges, the opportunities, and between us shared some ideas and some thoughts about approaches to navigating this terrain. So that's our plan. That's what we're hoping to cover off in the next hour or so. We would like to start with a very quick survey, just to get some audience participation to make sure you're awake. It would be really helpful for us to get a sense of your background in terms of what type of role you have. So we put together a very simple categorization. We didn't spend a lot of time thinking about this particular coding structure. A very simple categorization just to get some sense, some feel for where you're all coming from. And already I can see the scores are flooding in. Around almost half of the scores so far are coming from a planning and analysis space, and then maybe similar, maybe about a quarter from systems and data, and then registry and operations and heads of administrations, and 14% of you are others. So welcome especially to the others in this conversation. If I press that button there, I should be able to share the results. So you can see who you are, we can see who you are, and that's a great start. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for joining in with that. So look, a conversation a conversation about data. I guess for me, Al, it starts off with thinking about, you know, what it might seem like an odd question, but let's put our cards on the table here. You know, what do we mean by data?
We thought we should start with that. Hello, everybody. You know, we could have spent the whole 45 minutes having a discussion about what's the difference between data and information and knowledge and analytics. But I think at the end would have come up with nothing new, and probably wouldn't have taken ourselves terribly further forward. So we're going to suggest a slightly different approach. So Andy and I talk about data, but really what we're talking about is all of those things. So when we talk about, in the, sort of the following 35, 40 minutes, we talk about data. We'll try and qualify that by sort of adding, you know, we're thinking this is in the world of analytics, or we're thinking this in the world of modeling, or we're thinking this in the world of data operations, data governance. So we'll try and give you a flavor of what that means, but we're not going to try and compartmentalize sort of what the difference between data and information and knowledge and wisdom analytics is. And it's actually a really kind of interesting part of this is a lot of the time we talk about what does data mean, and yet actually we struggle as a sector, and we struggle in other sectors to be able to even define what those things mean. So it's kind of a sort of a meta issue that we're going to keep coming back to around what exactly do we mean by data. But in this case, we want to keep it nice and simple and say we want to cover off all the users, all the management, all the operation, and we'll provide some context as we go through. Did I miss anything there, Andy?
Yeah, I think so. That's a good place to start. Data in a post-COVID world, I guess for me, the conversation starts about thinking about what the new normality might look like. There's a huge amount of material, huge amount of writing out there about the future. There's an awful lot of people trying to make predictions. And so I guess we probably have to make a couple of predictions really to kind of frame this conversation about what we mean by the post-COVID world. What is the new normal? So I'm going to start maybe with a couple of ideas. I mean, the first thing that we have already seen as a part of the upheaval is massive changes to both delivery and the supporting operations within universities and providers. You know, we're talking about blended learning, massive shift to delivery online. Everyone has invoked their disaster recovery plan with what we're doing remote working, working at home, and everything's changed. So there's huge, there's a sense that things are really up in the air, and just the idea that that is not going to land quickly. Related to that, I think there has been a huge shift to, I mean, I call it virtual here. There's a huge shift towards digital, a huge shift towards remote. I heard someone comment recently that over the last 6 or 8 weeks, we've probably seen, you know, between 5 and 10 years worth of digital adoption, you know, compressed into this time. And, you know, so everything has changed. We are more reliant on the technology than ever before, and we are establishing different ways to manage our business, different ways to manage our operation. So we're in a period of immense change, wouldn't you say, Al?
I would, and I think it's. I mean, I think what I've seen as well is that we talk about novel approaches to novel problems, and what we're really seeing here is. I think as a sector, it's interesting to have so many planning colleagues on. I do believe we're very good at answering questions that we are able to phrase, and we kind of know, we may have looked at them, some of them before. I think what I'm seeing a lot of is we're asking questions that we really don't have any idea what the answer might be. And in fact, a lot of the time, we're not quite sure what the question might be. So there's all sorts of, I think, interesting data flying around. It's really what I think Andy and I have talked about a lot is it's brought a lot of bad data into the light, because this data has never really been looked at before, because we've never really had to consider it as part of an answer to make a decision or to help us set a direction. And I think that's taking Andy's point about different ways of working. Certainly, a lot of the universities I work with have had traditionally quite a command and controlled, multi-layered decision-making process. And what we're seeing is that's being boxed a little bit, and the decisions are being kind of made closer to the people who are going to be impacted by most of those decisions. So I think you know, we've not only got these different questions and answers we're trying to answer them, we're sort of trying to answer them in a different way. And this has made a certain amount of uncertainty in the universities around, you know, the structures by which we were using data to essentially track and assure and govern our decisions is some of those ways aren't working anymore because we don't have this hierarchy, we don't have the time. We're going to talk a lot about time, and we're going to talk a lot about trust. And what we're seeing then, what Andy and I are seeing, is like an emphasis around metrics. And Andy's going to talk specifically about metrics and measures and what that means from a regulatory point of view. What I'm really thinking about is more, how are we making quick decisions? How are we using these metrics to help us decide what kind of KPIs are we tracking that maybe we used to track over a long period? Maybe a lot of these were sort of lagging indicators, things that we were looking back on, you know, your classic kind of management statistics. And now I think we've really got this emphasis on more sort of leading indicators, on more things like, I need to be able to make a decision quickly. I need to be able to understand what the implication of that decision is. And I maybe don't have a good baseline for it. So you know, for me, the new normal feels, in some ways, you know, quite a scary place around the capability that we've had before, but also a place potentially full of opportunity. Because I think, as Andy was saying, I've just seen things that I cannot believe have happened in HE. You know, when I've been looking at it for 10, 15 years, have been happening in 4 to 8 weeks. And some of those management structures specifically around making these quicker decisions in kind of boxes is something I wasn't sure I would ever see in my career at HE. So I think data's got a big part to play in that, but it's in support of this. It's not a thing on its own. And that's another thing that we'll talk about, is we're not saying, you know, do better data for the sake of better data. We're really going to talk to you about why. And I think I'm going to hand back to Andy on that.
Okay, so the why, what do we need data to do in the future? And really, I want to start off by picking up on Al's point there around decision making, because, you know, we as a sector are used to a very steady, very predictable annual cycle of events. Every autumn, we go through the whole recruitment, the whole admissions thing. You know, we go through course delivery, we go through assessments and qualifications in the spring and early summer. And there's a very clearly defined and very well embedded cycle of activities, and therefore, you know, the kind of decisions and the kind of metrics we need to support those activities, we can predict them with a great deal of certainty. That's kind of going out of the window now, because we are going to be faced over the coming months and years with a set of decisions that we can't anticipate, and so therefore we need to think about a very different way of approaching this. It was very interesting, I think, yesterday in the Commons Committee with OFS, they're talking and answering questions from Parliament about how, you know, they are going to attempt to use the data to regulate in terms of outcomes, and a whole novel set of circumstances that the data is just not currently designed to do. So I think there's going to be a huge issue around trust, how we can get data that we trust. And Al, you do a lot of work around trust, don't you?
I do, and I kind of start most of these things by saying, you know, and it's a bit of a throwaway comment, but you know, sometimes the perception I get is that data is infinite, it's free, and it's mine. And because of that, I think some of the things Andy talked about, some of these structures that we're now looking data to support, it's not really there because of all sorts of historical reasons. And I think we're actually looking now at differentiators. I mean, one of the things that I find a lot with data is that we kind of spend our data budget on stuff, yeah, but we're not always aligning it to what the university needs. And we do that. There's all sorts of reasons outside the scope of here. We will talk a little bit at the end about how we think we should address that. But really what we're thinking now is that we need to focus on a couple of kind of ways of looking at data. And it's really building on Andy's point. Some of this is around trust, and I would call it confidence. And it's really, I want to be confident in the data, and I want to be confident in the data in a number of ways. I would need to think that, yes, I trust where it's come from, I trust the quality of it, I trust my ability or somebody else's ability to interpret it correctly, and I trust that other people will have the same amount of confidence that I do. And that's not a given. We all live in those times where we go to a meeting, somebody's counted 7, we've counted 9, and we spend the whole meeting deciding whose data is right. I'm not sure we have the time for that now, because we're going to be making these quicker decisions, as Andy said, we're not going to be looking out so far. We're going to be trying things, and we're going to be failing fast, you know, in a classic agile world. So timeliness is the other thing, is about how fresh is this data, how new is it, how good is it, what's it telling me against something that maybe I was only looking at 1 or 2 or 3 days before. You know, something that we're very familiar with in a clearing scenario, but not something that we really, I see that widespread outside of that. So I think some of the things that I would be looking at around there in terms of what does that mean about what the data needs to do, I think we need to be developing a capability that feels like it's got a forward-looking analysis bent to it. It's really saying, like something has happened and I need quickly to have the capability to spin up analysis. One of the one that I've been working on just last week was workforce planning. Really interesting around workforce planning, about people saying, if we're going to virtual teaching, what does that mean? Yeah, and what options do we have? And what, you know, we need to know. We need to look at 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 models, because we're not quite sure. We think that works, and the first model we tried wasn't even close, was not going to work. So we had to fail that one super fast and move on to the next one. So there's this thing about confidence and timeliness, but what that's giving you is agility. So I think we need to build ourselves some really agile, forward-looking analysis capability. And I think a lot of that, again, planning colleagues on the call, a lot of that we have really good people and structures and processes to do that. What I don't think we have right now, and I'm very happy to be challenged on this, I don't think we have it at scale, and I don't think we have it at speed. And I think for me, that's something around what our data needs to look at and needs to be focused on. If I'm going to spend my data budget, that's kind of where I want to be spending at least some of it. And we're certainly going to be spending some of it on regulation as well, at which point I will hand back to Andy, who understands this far better than I do.
So, I mean, perhaps unavoidably, given my background in data collection, I kind of want to touch on some of the issues around data in regulation. I mentioned it just now in terms of the committee, the OFS at the committee, and the challenges they face. And there is a real challenge. So we are in a sector now increasingly measured and judged by data. Metrics are used as proxies for quality. And you know, we see this in the TEF, we see this in God bless them, the league tables, we see all of these things, people looking to the data to make judgments and assessments about the quality of what we're doing. And just as our internal data operations and our internal analytical capabilities are going to be challenged by this need to make you know, decisions we can't anticipate, that will be done at a sector level by the funders, by the regulators, and so on. That is a huge issue for universities and providers now, because you are collecting and processing data now that will become a HUA return this autumn, and that will be, you know, the first site, and they'll be all over that looking for any kind of information they can get out of that for proxies around the quality of education. And if you read you know, some of the write-ups on the session yesterday, there's a very good piece on Wonky this morning about that. You know, I mean, they're going to be all over that student return looking for that data, and so therefore you need to be prepared for the dialogue with the funders, with the regulators, about, you know, what the data means, how it can and cannot be interpreted, and actually how this strange reality that we're going through now is being reflected in the data that's being processed at the moment. It might seem a long way away. I mean, you've probably got a whole host of more immediate issues to deal with right now, but the picture that your HUA return paints this year is going to be critical in terms of the conversations that you're having with your regulator going forward. I'm sorry, Al, that's quite a negative note.
Yeah, I guess so. But I mean, I think it's. I think it's fair to say that this is one of the things that we always talked about for anybody that was involved in the Data Futures pilot, was that, you know, if we can stop thinking about these things as two sets of data and thinking about them as one, you know, if we can create data that's good enough and we understand what it's used for, then we don't need to have this whole other industry, kind of this data double, this thing we have where we just make ourselves look a little bit more attractive, a little bit more thin. You know, we kind of go out there to the regulators in a slightly better way. I think that what Andy's points on the slide about a coherent and fair story are really important. And my view again is this is about timeless and speed, and this is really about being able to have confidence in the data that you have, that you can share with the regulators in a way that doesn't create this massive buffer of work between you and them. I mean, there's always going to be something. I'm just not quite sure it needs to be quite as big as something as it is at the moment. So that's my view on it.
Okay, let's take a slightly more optimistic approach on this and think about some of the opportunities that are out there, because, you know, we could spend all day thinking about the challenges and the difficulties, and they are big, they are significant, they are real. But let's think about the opportunities. So a lot of the work that I do now, and that Al and other good folks out there do now, is all about the relationship that we have with data. And at this time, when there is so much upheaval and we're all pivoting to digital technologies and new ways of working, and kind of right now, there's a sense of almost anything going. There is an opportunity, I think there was a huge opportunity for us to reset the way we think about data, the culture we have around data, that whole relationship that we have around data. And out of this rapid change experience, for me, I think there are two key strands to this, and in a sense they're not new, but I think there is a huge opportunity around, you know, raising the value of data as an asset, and as we are faced with these novel decisions, and as we need to drive more rapid decision making value out of data, as Al was saying, you know, there is something about, you know, saying data really is a strategic asset to us now, and getting that culture and that mindset really embedded, and therefore on the back of that we really have an opportunity to make strides in terms of professionalizing our management and governance of data. Because if we are faced with you know, once in a generation challenges, you know, we need some top professional skills and mindset and professional approach to dealing with those. And so I think, you know, there is something about the opportunity to reset that relationship. The other thing I think that also comes out of that, you know, very significantly, is you know, what we can learn from this upheaval. You know, we've been thrown into this situation. You know, there's new things, new exciting things happening all over the place, and it kind of, Al, goes back to what you were saying about, you know, doing some things and failing fast, and being prepared to try new things, see if they don't work. You know, see what we can learn out of this, because, you know, everyone I speak to over the last few weeks, there's a real strong sense of we don't want to go back to how it was, and whatever we think of that new normality, we have an opportunity to land it in a way that in a direction that we would much rather be going, rather than maybe some of the issues and challenges we faced previously. So Al, I'll start us off with some optimism there. What can you add?
Well, I think, you know, I'm going to pick up your point. I mean, you know, those of you that have met me, and Andy and I talk a lot about data being an asset. And, you know, I always say talk is cheap. What does that mean? And for me, when I think about data as an asset, there's lots of things around accessibility, about letting people have the data that they need for them to be more successful, spend less time doing things they shouldn't be doing, more time with the stuff they're actually employed for. But really, if we strip it back, when we look at the asset value of something, we're really looking at a couple of things that data can do. Data's got a couple of real hidden superpowers that other assets don't have. Most of them are around utility, using the same thing multiple times. And so I think about this about top line, and I think about it about bottom line. You know, I think this is about using data to create opportunities to allow us to be more successful in what we do, but also in thinking about data to reduce our operational cost. And I think we need to think about them both. And every university is different about kind of where they are on that dial. So I'm going to talk about both of those really. So one of the ways to sort of, for me, to increase the value of my data asset is to standardize it and to rationalize it. And I don't mean everybody has to look at the same piece of data all the time. I've worked in other sectors. We tried to do that at the banks. All that happened was people used to give very, very important spreadsheets on data sticks and put them in their pocket. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about saying we need to agree on which data is more important. And bits of data are more important than other bits of data, and they're the bits that drive the university. They're the bits that give the most important value to our students. They're the bit that support our research. They're the bit that shows our colours to our regulators, all of those kind of things. So we need to have that conversation that which data is important. And I'll keep going back. We are spending money on the data budget. We are spending money on data every single day. Let's spend that money more wisely by standardizing what we can, by rationalizing what we can, and by doing so, increasing the confidence and trust in that data, so that when I'm coming to make a decision, whether that's a very quick decision or whether that's a decision that affects potentially 1,000 people or 10,000 students, I've got the right data at the right quality at the right time, and I'm not going to spend lots and lots of time either being worried about that, or going out and finding that data again, or going back and rechecking, or having a kind of pointless discussion about whose data is correct. So I think there's a real opportunity to take so much of that fluff out of the things that we do every day. And I sit in those meetings, and my standard joke is, the day that I go a week without sitting in a meeting like that, I am going to retire. It's not happened yet. So I'm really keen that we do that. And really that's about how do we get confidence, how do we get trust? And we do that by looking at what data is more important and treating that in a special way. And we'll talk a little bit at the end about how we're going to do that. So that for me is about asset value. And then there's something about cost of operation. And the key thing for me is hidden data factories. So a hidden data factory is where somebody will, or some group of people will get some data. They'll say, oh, well, the data's not of good enough quality because it wasn't collected correctly, or many, many reasons. I have a spreadsheet with about 4,000 of them. And so what we're going to do is we're going to clean that data. I'm going to spend some time every day, potentially, making that data better so that I can use it. But that data doesn't go back into the main system. Let's say it's the student record system or the finance system, it doesn't matter. It doesn't go back. It's just a hidden data factory. It's like a data factory, except it doesn't really create anything other than work. And there's many, many of these very expensive in terms of people's time, processes that are hidden, these kind of hidden business processes that we do because we don't understand everything the data is used for. We don't know which bits the data is most important for. We're not creating the quality frameworks. And certainly, planning colleagues, I know how much, your people spend cleaning data. Whenever we talk about data governance, I always go and see the director of planning because, they will say to me, honestly, Alex, it's 30% cleaning, 70% use, or 50-50. This is clearly not a good way for us to be, as Andy said, sort of resetting our relationship with data. So I want to think about getting rid of that prevalence of spreadsheets, getting rid of that things where people can't get the data that they need, or they have to do something with it. And the other thing that and this is not about, to be absolutely clear, I'm not saying this because I want to say to you, you can lose some heads. Absolutely not. What I'm saying is this frees up the people to do the role that they're paid for. And if that's a student facing, a research facing, internal facing, it doesn't matter what that is. It means that they can do the thing that they're for. So whenever people talk about, we need to use data to improve the student experience, I absolutely get that. But we also need to use the data to improve the staff experience. And that's really what I'm talking about on these 2 points here.
Al, you mentioned spreadsheets. I'm not going to get triggered on that just now because we could go off in a very bad direction. So what I suggest we do, because I think you articulated that really well, what I suggest we do is we take a pause and just reflect on these opportunities. And Al, you and I put a fair degree of effort into sort of crafting these four. I would like to go back to the colleagues on the call here. And hopefully with the magic of survey technology, there you go. I mean, our question is, which of these four opportunities do you think is the greatest opportunity that we face now?
Yeah, if they're all yours, Andy, you don't win. Okay, just so we're clear. There's not we didn't have a bet on this, although maybe, actually, I'm sure there's more. Andy and I picked these four because we're clearly very passionate about them. It's what we see in our daily work with universities like yourselves. But we know that there are other opportunities. But I think it is, it's that culture-led change that Andy talks about. It's that professionalism. It's about deciding what's important. It's about spending our data budget wisely. It sounds like common sense, doesn't it, Andy? It sounds like common sense. Why? Let me ask you a question. We didn't even script. Why doesn't it happen, Andy?
Oh, because the world often does not adhere to norms of common sense as we would as we would expect, and let's not go down that rabbit hole right now.
But I think it's another thing about prioritization, though, isn't it, as well? It's that thing about it's never been seen as that important. And I think that's what's really changing now, is that we are at a point where it can be that important if people are prepared to kind of invest the time in it that it's not traditionally had.
I think so, and you know that the need to make decisions in this very uncertain time and drive value out of data in this very uncertain time, I think is going to drive is going to be a big driver for driving change and enabling some of these opportunities. So we've got the results in, and a bit like Eurovision at the weekend, we're all online here. So 42% of you think the greatest opportunity here is that one around standardizing and rationalizing the data estate, which I think is really interesting, because that's not a small one, is it, Al?
It's not, and sometimes it's really hard to know where to start. And again, we're going to talk about that at the end, so that kind of fits really nicely with that. I think, you know, how do you do that? Because there's many people involved. One of the things that we all know about is data in silo, but it's not just data in silo in this kind of independence of spirit and function. It's really about, you know, we need IT colleagues to help us with this, to understand the landscape, the information architecture, if you will. We need all of our colleagues who use this data to really help us understand what they're using it for, so we can set the quality. We need a framework and some ownership around data to allow us to do that. It's all possible, and it's all possible to do it incrementally and everything else, but sometimes it feels like it's in the too hard bucket. I don't think it is, but certainly of all of those, standardizing and rationalizing data estate is, you know, there's a hump. It will get a little bit better before it gets worse, a little bit worse before it gets better, but it absolutely will get better.
Okay, let's talk about the hump, shall we? Because we've had our moment of you know, optimism, and so, you know, the issues and risks in this, and this is kind of where we come down to earth a little bit, isn't it? And you know, I mean, let's not underestimate this. If I can make the computer work, there you go. You know, the amount of turbulence that we're facing at the moment. And that is not that's not going to go away. And there is something about, you know, that old thing they talk about rebuilding the aeroplane in flight, and there is a sense in which kind of we're having to do that in all areas of our business at the moment, all areas of our operation, and you know, just the difficulty around that should not be underestimated. And look, I mean, perhaps a risk, certainly an issue. You know, we've touched on it a few times already, but you know, how is the regulatory process going to work around this? What will be the implications for data-led assessment, data-led quality judgments and regulation? And of course, data futures is now back on the agenda, and there is a timetable. There is a way forward at last on that. And you know, it might feel like a long way away, and I think one of my big concerns around data futures now is that, you know, people might look at those dates and say, well, that's years away, we can think about something a bit more immediate this week, but it's only 2 operating cycles before we have to stand all that up. So I think there are some big issues there. And the third one, I guess, to touch on is something I know we both talk a lot around, Al. It's the people side of this. It's the culture, it's the skills, and you know, for a subject that is inherently hard, because data is all about hard, rational logic and stuff. You know, we often find ourselves working with universities where it's fundamentally all about the people. It's all about the culture, and you know, the messaging, the mindset. So you know, there is something about saying it's not all about the technology, it's not all about the data. You know, we have to carry the people with us, isn't that right?
Yeah, I think so. I hear a lot data-enabled culture, data-driven businesses, and I like to hear those words. But again, sometimes there's nothing behind them. You put your hands to it; it's like a veneer. You know, culture's hard. We know culture's hard. You know, we shouldn't underestimate the power of the crowd. I mean, this for me is like an issue and an opportunity. If we can get, you know, colleagues behind the idea that we're going to move to a data culture, the power of that compared to it being something, well, I don't do data, or data's a data science thing. It's a hard skill, as Andy says. Everybody does things with data. You know, we want to democratize data. You know, I am passionate about the fact that we need to give people the skills to allow them to interact with data. And you know, I look at a job role, you know, I see many things in a job role, in a standard university job role, and they're all great stuff, but I don't see anything is, do you have these data skills? Because you're going to need some data skills to do your job. I don't see that. We don't. And so when people talk to me saying we've got a data culture, I'm thinking, well, that's the first place I'm going to look, and I don't see it. So the risk for me is that if we don't commit to it, and we don't say we will treat this as an asset, and that means we will train people. And there's a line here, and at one end of the line there are very clever, intelligent data scientists doing amazing things I don't even begin to understand. But everybody is managing data at some point, and what we mustn't do is make it worse for the next person along the line. You know, we mustn't make how you treat data at your university. You know, how do I learn that? It depends how good the person I'm sat next to is. That's not good enough. Right? So we have to do better around how we culturally move people to a skills-based framework around data. I think universities are ahead of the game, because I just think it's far more collegiate. It's a better environment to do that from certainly other industries I've worked in. So I think there's certainly issues around there, and they're not small. I think there's some near-term ones as well around what Andy and I have called student perspectives, and there's two sides to this. And this is really thinking about what's the first, you know, specifically what's the first term going to feel like? What's the autumn term going to feel like? And there's really two parts of this perspective: is how as a university are we going to deliver value and assure quality? And that's not just around our regulatory reporting. That's about what we do. Yeah. How are we going to measure that? You know, how are we going to know how engaged our students are? How are we going to take things that work really well in a physical world and measure them in a virtual world? How are we going to do that and be credible? You know, I think that's a big challenge. And the second thing, which I think is interesting, is how are the students going to perceive the value? I mean, we've seen stuff in the press when it came out on early May, you know, full fees, and the students are saying, well, it's not the same experience. I'm not getting the same experience. I'm having essentially the student experience at a distance, and I'm not sure that's the same. So how are the students, what are the students going to be asking for? What are they going to be saying, look, the university, you need to prove to me almost that you're giving me the same experience. What data are they going to be asking for? Do we have that? Is it robust? Are we confident in it? Is it timely? Do we have a culture around it? So I am concerned about those two things. I mean, the culture for me is a real opportunity, and so is the student perspectives, but the student perspective ones are real near term, and I think we need to be aware of what's coming down the line there. So if you get anything to add, Andy?
I think we need a plan, Al.
I think we need a plan.
What's the plan, Al?
Well, one of my, again, it does sound like I'm just making these things up, but really, again, the thing that I've learned is that, if you don't know where you're going, you'll end up somewhere else. And so one of the things I think with a plan is back to that thing about priorities. Yeah. So if we accept that what we've started to talk to you about is we need to build a capability around our data, and a capability that we can visibly see, and it's some of its culture, some of its process, some of its data management, some of its technology, without a doubt, we kind of need to know two things. We need to know, where the heck are we right now? Where are we? What state are we in? That's a very wide stakeholder conversation. I'm not a massive fan of kind of nailing the as-is state. I'm kind of more interested in where we're going, but we have to kind of know where we're starting. And there's about, on a standard sort of data maturity assessment, there's like 20 things you can look at, and you just don't do that. I think what we're recommending is saying, what works for university, what you really care about, let's measure those things. Let's measure those things. If we understand where we are, then there's a couple of things. We kind of get a feeling of where the capability is and where it's weak. And it will be weak in some places, but we'll also find where it's strong. Because one of the things that Andy and I see all the time is there are these outbreaks of brilliant practice in universities, which we just find all over the place. And they are hidden because of everything else that goes on in the university. I would argue, if I was being a bit contentious, that they are wasted, because something will happen further up the line that will actually destroy the value that's being created. But there's strengths out there, and it's not just people that have the skills. They are passionate, they are advocates, they're with the people we need in the tent. We need to find those people as part of our assessment. So it's not just about saying everything on the spaceship is broken. It's about saying, let's establish where we are and what's good that we can scale up and scale out. Okay. Then the second thing we need to do to help us plan is say what's important to us. And I'm going to go back to it again. What are our priorities? How to identify those? What does the university want to do? You know, I spent a lot of time beating my head against the door because I didn't understand that nobody cared about the quality of data the same way that I did. And that's not they didn't care about the quality of data. I was just not articulating it to them in a way that made sense. We need to say that making better data is pointless. We need to say that strategic KPI, that problem that we know about, this issue we can't mitigate, it's an external issue. We're going to mitigate, it's an external issue, we can't make it go away. This thing we really care about, what data do I need at what quality to be able to make good decisions, to have good outcomes for those things I care about. That's how I identify my requirements. I look at what the key priorities are, and then I just manage them. You know, we just do gap analysis. It really is, you know, and every single university is different. Some people want to do quick wins. I get that. You know, show me this stuff working. Let's do things quick, fail fast. Some people say, no, we want to go slower because we think we need these things in place. There's no cookie cutter. I wish there was, but certainly in terms of planning, where do we want to be? What are our key requirements? What's the gap? Let's make some evidence-based decisions about which ones we close and which ones have the most value. So that's my two.
So then I pick up on that, and I think actually to turn that into reality, there's something about the current method of working. There's something about the upheaval, and just you know, empowering people to actually move on, make progress with some of these things. Give them the information that they need. Give them the ability to take decisions. Empower them. There's something always challenging, I think, around data about letting go of control, isn't there? And you know, it's not without its risks. I think there's something about piloting ideas. There's certainly related to that the idea that you have to be happy with the idea that you can fail and fail fast and learn from your failures and move on. And we have to be okay with that. We have to, you know, develop, I think, a better relationship with failure than many of us have in the past. But actually, there's something about, you know, creating a new culture, creating a new mindset that says these are different times. We've got a new set of challenges, and you know, no one individual in the organisation can make this happen. No one individual in the organisation is going to solve all of these problems. I think it's about communicate and empower people. Empowerment. You know, this is potentially a good news story, isn't it? You know, you're being empowered, you know, to take decisions, to develop things, because everything else in the world is changing. You know, to find your way through this, and you know, to help to create the solutions that we need to close those gaps that you talk about, you know, from where we are to the requirements that we have. So I as always in these things, I end up going back to the people side of it, Al. That's where I always end up, and I guess it's similar for you.
It is. It's a culture-led change. I mean, I fully support what you just said there, Andy. And, you know, and we've all, you know, technology is not going to save you. It's going to support you, but it's not going to save you. This is about investing in our people in a way that democratizes data and treats it as an asset and allows people to be successful with data in a way that they haven't been able to be before. I genuinely believe data is a sleeping giant, and I think it just needs the same sort of focus and rigor and professionalism and care that we treat our other assets, be that our estates, our finance, our workforce. That's kind of my final view on it. Brilliant.
Oh, that's great. So listen, I think that kind of brings us to an end of the slightly rehearsed section of this afternoon. I wonder if I can bring Robin in.
Hi guys, thank you very much for that. It was really helpful. Picking up the question we've been asked, I think there's a theme emerging, and the theme, picking up Michelle's question, but also a couple of comments in the chat box, is around about how do you get data which is rapid, immediate, which enables decision making just now, especially from the student perspective, so rather than having lagging data such as PTES, how do you have that more leading data enabled decision making moving forward? What are your thoughts on that?
You want me to start with that, Andy, or do you want to start?
Yeah, you go, Well.
So again, I think that's very much what I would call material data. That's where you identify the data that you really care about, and you assess it in terms of what matters. And in this case, it would be timeliness. So how do I get that data quicker? And there'll be all sorts of reasons that you can't get it. It'll be stuck in systems. It's got manual integration, what we call swivel chair integration. Type it from one into the other. It won't be available in the way that you want it. You won't trust it. The terminology will be incorrect. There'll be many problems with it where you can't have it quickly. They are all absolutely fixable. And that for me is a classic example of where you say, this is really important data and it's coming too late, so its value is diminished. The entropy of it means that we can't use it for what we want to. Therefore, there's a priority for us. There's a pilot. Yeah, so I think that's one of those where you establish your requirements, go and look where it is, and then yeah, you just have to kind of build out that solution in a way that's very sustainable. Too many times I see people do data quality projects where they clean up some data, but they don't fix the root cause, and that just means the thing happens again. So I think you've got to think about this in holistic ways. It's like anything I fix has got to stay fixed. You can't fix everything, but you can fix something.
And I would add something in a very similar vein. I mean, what I was talking about there, and actually really emphasise the first stage of that process, which is all for me about discovery, and it's that idea of do you really know what data you've got? Do you really know what data is residing in systems, in academic departments, in back offices, and so on? Because actually, you know, what I certainly find very often is that when Al and I talk about the data estate within a university, the first problem is, in many cases, a university doesn't really know what data it has. And so, you know, when faced with a situation like this, the first question for me has always been, well, what actually have we got? So I think, you know, kind of at the front end of what Al's talking about there, I think there's a very significant discovery piece, which you could argue you shouldn't have to do. You could argue you kind of should do it anyway. But you know, the reality is it's time to go out there with a clipboard and sniff around and find out exactly what is lurking out there.
So if anybody's got other questions, please keep typing them in the question and answer box. We'll work through them. I'm just going to pick up on that, Andy and Alex, in terms of that sense of what estate do we need to build. There's a comment in the chat there from Rob, who was making the comment, if events become more predictable, how do you predict in advance what you might need in that data space? So it's almost like that sense of you've building an estate, but you don't really know what estate you need to build. So any thoughts on how you build an estate when you don't know what you're going to need?
I mean, I'll take Andy's, I'll steal Andy's example of rebuilding an aeroplane in flight. I think you don't know the specific questions, but you know the kind of questions. So you know the kind of questions that you're going to be being asked that you need to ask. And I think, you know, so you're going to know there's going to be conversations about financial projections. There's going to be conversations about online assessment. There's going to be conversations about estates management. And I think the way you get ahead of that is you go into those domains and you assign accountability so people actually own those domains, and that way you can you have a proper place to go to fix things. And you just start to identify. You work with the subject matter experts and say, what do you get asked the most about? What are the things that you think are the triggers, the data triggers, the things that we really care about? Because they're likely to be the same ones. You're not going to get it all, but you can certainly get a really good subset. Again, I would go back to Andy's point of a lot of that stuff is out there. It's just kind of hidden under people's silos. So I think you have to start by having some really honest conversations about what are we doing with all this data? What are we using it for? And if I said to you, you can only have 10, what are the 10?
Andy, anything to add there?
Yeah, so look, I mean, it's a brilliant question, and in a sense, it is always the impossible question, because by its very nature, data happens to reflect something that happens in the real world, and therefore it is always by definition behind the event. It is always behind the real world event. So I think for me, the two issues about firstly closing that time gap. What can be done to make the data more rapid, and we've talked a little bit about that already, and Al was talking about, when we talk about what data needs to do, it needs to be faster, it needs to be more timely. So we can certainly reduce that. The other thing that we can do, and this is probably more of an architectural point, there is something about making your data more granular and more flexible, and don't actually, in the medium and long term, don't design your data so it is a simple snug fit with today's reality. And maybe that's one of the big lessons to come out of this experience, is the idea that we have all created our data architecture and our data systems and our data processes to work with what was actually a very predictable reality, and now we've thrown some unpredictability into it. We're actually going to find out where it breaks. So there is some intelligence to be gained in this, but actually the answer to the question that's being asked is it's kind of impossible, because data is by its nature, it always reflects what happens in the real world a moment ago.
Okay, we've got another question here for you. Another potential issue is that current data is being used responsively rather than universities focusing on planning data. How effectively conversations set by senior stakeholders who don't perhaps prioritize data, and data isn't leading the conversation. How do you influence more broadly in the institution to get that sense of data driving, data being much more a priority in the institution, much more focused on collecting the right data to make decisions? Any thoughts on how you influence that?
So this is perhaps a good time for difficult conversations, isn't it? And the idea that we've been kind of a number of data professionals across the sector have been trying to sort of raise the profile of data and the professionalism of data for a long time, and there's a sense in which kind of when things ain't broken, it's quite a difficult sell to make. So there is something about the opportunity and that thing about resetting our relationship with data. And I kind of, when we're talking about resetting the relationship with data, I think we have to think about that organization wide. It's no longer me resetting my relationship with data or Al resetting with his relationship with data. We have to do it as an organization. We have to do it entity wide. And if the organization wants to have the information, the decision-making capability to navigate its way through these turbulent times, then it is it is a critical element of the foundations that you need to have good data on which to do that. The other side of that is if you're not going to take your data seriously at this point, then you're not going to be in a position to make sound decisions, maybe when things get extraordinarily difficult in 6 months' time. And this is the time, I think, for some of those very hard conversations. Al?
Nothing much to add. Speaking truth to power, absolutely. We are. The only thing I would say is that we are all, and I include myself in this, have been guilty of rewarding bad behaviour, of giving people very, very clean, very senior people, very clean data. We spent weeks and weeks working on, and they don't see that effort, and we don't tell them. So as far as they're concerned, the data's good. So I think that there is to think absolutely everything Andy said, but also just to say, we need to bring this dirty data into the light. We need to explain to you where we're at, and we need to explain it in a way that's not something that's saying, let's go back and see how we've got here. Why have we built systems to do that? Let's not do that. Let's talk about how do we get out of it and how do we prioritize the most important things. So for me, that's the conversation we need to be having. And the last thing I'd say is we have to visibly align the data we care about to the things that those very senior stakeholders care about, and make sure that link is understood. It is not optional, it is mandatory.
Okay, great, thanks. A couple of questions which are maybe more straightforward. If we can, I don't know if we'll manage it, but if we can get a yes, no from you on these, this might be a nice challenge. Dave Berry's asking, as part of cultural change, perhaps we should start by appointing, training and supporting data stewards.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, I thought that might be the answer. Anything to add on that? Any really short comment, or is
Yes.
Go on, Andy.
No, just something about the importance of having clearly defined roles and responsibilities. Al touched on it in the presentation, but that is a key element in actually driving that cultural and organisational change. Having the conversations around those roles, what being a data professional looks like. There is some great work going on at Cardiff University, and I think they've won some awards for this concept of creating the notion of a data professional, a community of data professionals, and that is absolutely critical to this.
What
Okay.
Andy said.
Another one which will push you for a yes, no, and with one line of explanation. We need rapid data now in the COVID-19 pandemic. Will we need the same rapid data in the post-COVID world? Or do you think so I guess the question is, will the work put in now for the getting rapid data, will that become the new normal, that more rapid data?
I would say yes, because that's the capability that we need to build and to scale out, and I don't think that time will be wasted.
Andy?
It's good investment. It's extraordinarily good investment, and the world we go back to is not going to be the same as the world we've left. So yeah, absolutely, we need that. Okay,
one more question, I think, which we'll pick up on before we finish off today. This one's popped in through the chat box, and in the post-COVID-19 world, how we determine KPIs and sector benchmarks to inform quality baselines. So obviously there's KPIs, whether or not they're OFS or if they're driven by PTES or NSS and the like. What are they going to look like in the future? How should institutions approach that challenge? Because obviously Anton Muscatelli at the Russell Group was talking last week about the NSS being basically a waste of time for this group of students finishing off, because there's so many contextual factors. What do you think those new benchmarks will look like, and how will they emerge?
My quick one on that is, again, I don't know, but what you need is a really flexible data asset. You need something that can respond quickly, and you need something that you can respond quickly and trust without having lots of cleaning into it. I don't think it's a question of trying to understand what everything might be. I think it's about positioning your data so it can answer those questions quickly.
And therefore, this is a time of opportunity, because those things are going to have to be rebuilt, along with so much else in the world is going to have to be rebuilt. So actually, it is an opportunity for us to think about those measures, those KPIs, the data, as we build the new post-COVID world, I think.
And I think that's a nice place to finish on, as an opportunity to think about the future and to think about actually how the sector can redefine how it's measured, assessed, and how data drives that. So thank you very much, Andy and Alex. Thank you to all the attendees. It's been really great to have you with us today. And we'll make sure that we get the recording out, and it will be advertised via the Twitter feed. Thank you very much for your time, everyone.
Thanks all.